Okay, so now what we're going to have a bit of a look at is forecasting. Now, when we talk about forecasting, we're talking about the process of making a statement about events that haven't actually taken place yet. So or outcomes that haven't taken place. So what we're really trying to do here is make an educated guess, or sometimes known as a best guesstimate. Okay, so a bit of an estimation on what we think is going to happen, or where we think something is going to go. Now, the reality is that there's always going to be a level of risk and uncertainty, that's business, but that also certainly applies to forecasting, okay? So we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know what's definitely happening. What we can do though is to use the information around us to start to come up with some sort of informed decision or some sort of informed position which allows us to sort of anticipate what's probably going to happen next, okay? So when we do that, obviously we need to start thinking about if we're communicating those ideas and saying that something's going to happen, we also need to think about attaching some sort of modifier to that or some sort of additional information, letting people know that that's our best guess or based on what. There's a good chance it's going to happen, there is a chance it's going to happen, there is some chance it's going to happen, and letting people know, the sort of the accuracy of our guess. Because if it really is a guesstimate, I just reckon, then we need to really think about that. But if it's based on as much evidence as we can get, we can say that as well. So we start to look at things like sales forecasting. Okay, so are our sales growing over time? Are they going up? Are our sales flatlining, that they've been fairly stable for a while and not really doing much? Or do we think that actually we could go into decline? We might start thinking about, are our sales seasonal, that they change with the seasons? In summer we sell ice cream, in winter we don't. Or is it cyclical, that it operates on a fairly tight cycle of demand? For example, petrol prices, very much cyclical. They're cheap on Tuesday, and then on Thursday it's expensive again, just in time for the weekend. They make sure they charge a whole lot more money all of a sudden for no apparent reason. Okay, but we can start to work that out. All right, we start thinking about, forecasting allows us to get a little bit defensive, okay? None of us like to find that something bad happens or something unexpected happens that might cost us a lot of money, okay? We think ahead just a little bit, okay? If we start getting to trend forecasting, what we're trying to do there is we're trying to say, well, what's happening over time? What has been happening? And if that's been happening, what's the likelihood that's going to continue, okay? So where is that market going to go and what's making that happen? All right, so we trend market. What we also might start to think about is intervention marketing. So we're looking at a trend, we're seeing a long-term decline, or we're seeing a long-term problem, or we've flatlined. Okay, so what are we going to do, or what marketing are we going to have to take to try and change that around and get some sort of intervention going in there? Okay, from an offensive point of view, so previously we were being just defensive and protecting ourselves and starting to see what's going on to stop anything bad happening. From an offensive point, it allows us to start to make decisions before our competitors can. Okay, so what's happening is rather than us just moving along with them, we're trying to get ahead of them so that they're reacting to us, okay? So that we're driving the change, or we're the ones first to the market with the new thing, or we're the ones that see the opportunity before they do, so we can be miles in front of them when it happens, okay? So when we're making those decisions, we have to gather quite a lot of information, make sure we have as much information as possible, and that'll avoid us making unsafe investments, okay? So we need to make sure that when we're about to take this new initiative that we've really considered it. No one else has gone there, so we can't learn from the mistakes of others and their misfortune. If we see something bad happen to them, we know, let's not do the same thing. But if we're the first ones out there, well, we're obviously operating, very much by ourselves. So trend forecasting is one of the best ways that we can achieve that goal because we're monitoring continuously. Okay, so that's the key part there. We're going to monitor continually and make sure we're finding out what's going on there. And when we do that, and we're continually monitoring, our managers are able to make important decisions based on the evidence available. Okay, so in a nutshell, we started to look there at defensive, which was about protecting ourselves and covering ourselves from what's happening or what can we do or how can we intervene. Or we've looked at offensive. Okay, where we've stopped just protecting ourselves and we're stepping out to start getting into the market or get ahead of our competitors, okay, so that we're naming the tune that they then have to dance to. Okay, but both of those require ongoing monitoring, okay? We never stop, we're just always continually taking on information. Some of the things we might start to think about monitoring are things like demand. Okay, like the petrol station, as I said, we know that on Tuesday petrol's pretty cheap. It's Tuesday, but everyone's filling up ahead of the weekend, so the big demand is going to be pushed onto the Thursday, Friday, which just happens to be when they jack their prices up magically for no apparent reason, as I say. But demand forecasting involves the techniques, including both our informal methods, so taking a look around and having a bit of a look, an educated guess, and quantitative and qualitative information, such as what has been the historical use. They look and say, how many people, on what day bought what. So there's a little bit of I reckon, hey, it's a weekend. Our best guess is people are going to do stuff on weekend, like go on holidays. They're going to buy petrol, they're going to fill up, and then next week they're going to use it. Obviously, that's instinctive. But we can also use the sales tracking and history records to actually get that real solid information to back up our opinion. Okay, and then they can work out, well, if everyone fills up on Friday, we need to make sure that we can satisfy that demand by having plenty of petrol. Okay, so that's a really clear, obvious purpose of demand monitoring or demand forecasting. Okay, so it involves techniques that allow us to then make a price decision. Okay, so if we know that heaps of our customers are going to come in and they're going to want that petrol, maybe we can push the price up there. On the other hand, if we know not as many people are interested in Tuesday, but we still need to move stock, maybe we can drop the price down, maybe we operate a lower price on those days. Okay, it allows us to make some pricing decisions as well as thinking about future capacity and make sure that we can satisfy demand. There's nothing worse than if they got there on Friday and there wasn't any available, that's going to become a problem for us. Okay, which leads into supply. Okay, if we know the demand's there, we need to now do our supply forecasting, which means that if we're the petrol station, we're going to have to start thinking about, well, can we satisfy this demand? Do we have enough of the stock to make sure that they can get what they need? Okay, so we need to start thinking about our supply chain, which means, can our suppliers provide to us? Okay. Can our suppliers supply? Do we have storage capacity? If heaps and heaps and heaps of customers are coming in, well, where are we going to put all that petrol? Do we have enough? Okay, or enough space? Okay, so that's when we're starting to look at there. So we're, looking in, absolute terms of precisely what we have. Okay, so we want to start thinking about what have we got there available? Can we satisfy that demand when it comes in, or are we going to end up with a shortfall? Okay, so we need to start thinking about, what are our full range of products that we're offering? Okay, start working out all those figures there. Start thinking about what the sales of the product's going to be, and then make sure that our demand and our supply are actually going to work there. Okay. The next thing that starts to look at there is, the production. We might start to have a think about our production. Okay. In a made-to-order environment, okay, production activities are particularly, they're usually scheduled based on model option logic, but forecasting is also heavily applied. But we need to think about what's our means of production, what's the demand, how do those things work together, can we provide things on time, how long is it going to take us to make those items, do we have the right resources, and start to really have a bit of a look at what our future capacity is going to be. All right. Same, which will then lead straight into profit. Okay, as you can see, this starts to become very sequential in nature. Okay, profit forecasting is predicting the future and resulting profitability of a specific company. Obviously, we start thinking about what's the demand, what's the supply, what's our ability to produce, and that turns into a bit of a mathematical equation. Okay, that's pretty much all we're looking at there. And we start to think about different variables. So, what's happening in the world around us might certainly come into that. So, our environmental factors, which we might do through a STEEP analysis, for example. Some of these things we might do through our SWOT analysis and start to understand what our capacities are. But ultimately what we want to do is to try and start to get a really good picture of what might happen going forward. If we know there's a big demand and we can't supply, well, what's going to happen there, and what steps do we want to take? Okay, once again, are we being defensive, or are we going to try and be offensive and take that information and push it forward? Okay, sometimes we can try and sway the argument to say we're a good investment. If we were looking at, talking about profit particularly, we might provide lots of data. Okay, Because what will happen is, investors or analyst companies will take a look at us and go, well, okay, they've really got this information down. They've really thought about all their different strategies and techniques and procedures they're going to incorporate. So that's going to drive the company value up, okay? That becomes very attractive. And then we might also think about, well, what's our advertising? Okay, so we're not obviously going to advertise the whole year round in the same way. Okay, we might start thinking about increasing our sales promotions to increase demand. Okay, so we might think about spending a bit of an advertising budget to increase our demand. And an obvious one of that, once again, if I'm selling something like an ice cream, I know that just before summer hits, I want to really start plugging my company. So I can forecast that if we're down here in Australia, that I know that if I start advertising out September through to October and raise my September, October, November, start to raise the spend in December, January and February, then I'll start to see the demand pick up. So I know that my advertising cost will go up in the first bit, but that should then come into increasing demand, which I then need to make sure I'm meeting with supply. So you start to see, can we make enough ice creams? Can we then put them where they need to be? How many people are going to want them? Okay, do we need to come up with a new product? Are we going to be offensive? Have we seen a new opportunity to push? Okay, so as you see, all these things start to come into some sort of measure. And if we can increase the demand and we can supply to that and we can produce enough to get there, then we start to think our profit's going to pick up. But our advertising budget's going to pick up. So you start to see these things all become to interrelate. Okay, now what we can also do is we can look back to the past and try and determine what we've spent in the past and what happened and what worked, and that's going to lead us obviously to some degree in our decision making, okay, and thinking, what's the real cost, okay? Last time we ramped up production, what did it really cost us? Last time we tried to put that into the market, what did it really cost us? And make that decision, okay? So we need to analyze that historical data. We need to go back and make the point that when we do push out there, if we are going to increase that advertising push, that we are ready. Okay, there's no point us pushing the advertising out there, raising the advertising budget. We know that that should have an effect on increasing demand. There's no point if we can't then match the demand. So we need to make sure that when we're using our advertising budget, that we've really thought through the rest of the picture and made our forecast to say, well, can we get it, if we're increasing that demand, can we make sure that our supplies match that? How much demand do we think we're going to make? Looking back at previous historical records, once again, we look back at our data, which is why data collection is really important. You need to collect everything because you're going to make a future decision based on what happened last time. We've learned from our mistakes in the past, and then we push forward into the future, and what's going to happen. How many more customers are going to want, how many more ice creams have we been out there pushing those? Okay, so things like e-commerce came out, and since then customers have been demanding. They want stuff now, okay? When you're out there making promises, back in the day, people were a bit more relaxed. Now people want things yesterday. Okay, so if we're going to be out there pushing advertising, we need to be ready almost instantly now. It used to be a long pause between start sending the message and something happening. Now people click buttons. Okay, so we're down to that speed now. They press a button, they want the object to pop out. They put the coins in the machine, they want the candy bar. Whatever it happens to be, there is no patience anymore. We need to be right on it. We won't have the luxury of time. Okay, so what that really leads us to is starting to think about supply, the sales forecast. Okay, the thing that we're looking at there is we start to think about, well, what's the sales forecast? So we need to look well ahead. As I say, if we're looking to start a campaign for selling the ice creams in summer, well, the advertising campaign went in September, which meant that we had to be right ahead of it. So we need to start looking well ahead to get our investments in line, to start thinking about our products, to start thinking about our staffing, to start thinking about means of production, which meant we probably, if that happened in September, then we were probably doing this stuff back in June. Okay, so all of a sudden you start to see we're really going forward. The sales forecast is really critical there because it allows us to then say, well, if this is what we're going to be selling, these are the things we need to be doing. These are the numbers of employees we need. Okay, so we need to think about how many staff, how many people do we need available making our goods and services. We need to start thinking about our promotional mix. So it could be even, how we're going to go out to the market. What are we going to say? What are the key messages that we want to start bringing for people? What is it that we need them to know or to hear? How are we promoting the brand? What are we saying about it? Okay, that all becomes in there. we start to need to make an investment from some of our funding into our ability to produce and supply, okay? To make sure that our production capacity is satisfactory and that we can actually do what we say we're going to do, all right? So when we think about forecasting, really we start to look at macro and micro, okay? So when we talk about macro, we're looking at the whole market. So in this case, we might look at the whole ice cream market. Okay, so next summer, how many ice creams are going to get sold? What's going to happen? How often? To how many people? What's the big picture? Okay, so that's when we start to look at, well, what is the market demand? Okay, there's no point us going out and creating some massive amount of product if there's not really the demand for it across the market. Okay, it's just going to lead to a lot of wastage. Okay, if we get down to the micro, that's when we start to look at, well, we're segmenting that down and saying, well, what sort of ice creams did they buy? Was it all ice cream or was it ice confection, or did they just want an icy pole? Did they want, what sort of product were they going to get to? And that's talking about unit sales, all right? So very specific, very detailed information. That way we can understand, well, if that's the whole market, where do our products sit within that market? How many do we sell of this product versus our competitors? Okay, and then we can start to look at our share of a market. Okay, so once again, unit sales. So macro, big picture, what's happening across the whole industry or the whole area. Micro, how many units? Okay, so now we're down to really counting those numbers. Okay, so things we might just start look at is the different trends. So we might look at the sales trends. As I say, if I'm looking once again at this ice cream market, is it a market that's actually growing? Next summer, is it going to be bigger than it used to be? Are sales on the rise in that space? Or is it about the same as it was last year? In which case it's flatlined. Okay, sales growth doesn't change this summer, next summer, same. Or worse, is the market actually getting smaller and declining? Okay, is the market in a space of decline where it's obviously starting to get smaller and smaller? If it's getting smaller and smaller, the question has to be, do we want to be in it? Or is it time to start looking at other opportunities? Once again, forecasting is going to give us that answer, okay? So we're going to be able to make some good decisions there. As I say, we start looking at, is this a seasonal product? Okay, ice cream is pretty seasonal, okay? We know there is a big demand for it in summer. To some degree, maybe even the back of autumn, maybe a little bit of spring, but in winter, no one is buying the ice cream, okay? It's definitely not happening unless they're very strange or from some place that's, freezing cold or something bizarre, and they think that's okay. But in Sydney, people aren't buying thongs to go to the beach in June. Not happening, okay? So, well, it might, probably not, okay? Only if they're going to a different beach in a different country, and then they're called tourists, okay? So you might think about that. Hey, tourist market, nothing wrong with that, okay? The other one might be, as I say, it could be that cyclical sales fluctuate in a pattern, okay? So they go up and down, but there's a pretty set pattern to how that operates. Could be on a shorter term cycle. Petrol prices, as I say, in Sydney, buy your petrol on a Tuesday. Do not buy it on a Thursday or a Friday, or you will pay lots of money. Tuesday good, Thursday, Friday bad, okay? This is where the consumer can start to take advantage as well. All right, so think about this stuff as a consumer, because you can actually save a lot of money for yourself by knowing when the peak and off-peak periods are. Okay, so really, as I say, this is really about looking forward, gathering up the information, finding out what's going on, making your best informed guess. Okay, we've seen this all along. This is nothing new to you. You will have seen this in everything you've done already. You know what the cheap day is to buy pizza. You know what the cheap day is for the movies. You know when the cheap prices are available for travel. Okay, and you've been out there and looked at that information to take advantage of it for yourself all along. Now all we're doing is doing the same thing for business. We're trying to work out what's the demand going to be for our product. We're trying to think about the supply to get the resources to us and get it out there as well, so we can supply it to other people. We've thought about production, so our ability to manufacture to make sure it meets demand. We've thought about our profit, we've thought about the advertising push, and we've thought about our messages, okay? So that's pretty much forecasting. Do what you've already been doing instinctively all along, and just this time we're doing it for our business. Gather the best information you can, make the most informed decisions you can, be prepared to make the guess, be prepared to be offensive when needed, be defensive day to day just to look after your business, and you'll do great. Cheers.